Have you ever reacted to something and thought, wow, that response was way bigger than the situation? Like someone doesn't text you back and suddenly your nervous system is like, abandonment, danger, panic. And you're sitting there thinking, why am I like this? I literally just wanted to order coffee. Welcome to Unapologetically Reborn, the podcast where we talk about trauma, nervous systems, childhood stuff, and why your brain still thinks like it's 1987 and you're grounded emotionally. This isn't a just think positive podcast. It's a let's explain why your body's freaking out and how to calm it down podcast. If you've ever Googled, why am I so sensitive? Am I crazy or just traumatized? Or how to stop living in survival mode? Congrats, you found your people. Unapologetically Reborn, healing, humor, science, and rebirth without pretending everything's fine. Hi, and welcome to our show. My name is Alicia Lynch.
And this is Cody Fulham, the good-looking co-host.
We created this podcast because we feel as though there are not many safe places to discuss real-life issues. We feel like we live in a world where being honest is frowned upon. Someone may get offended, so people are basically afraid to speak their truth. My opinion, I guess I feel like there's two different ways to say just about anything. I've thought about this several times and continuously tried to talk myself out of doing this podcast. I'm aging, wrinkles are appearing, gray hair, don't want to be in front of the camera. Another thing, while we're getting to know each other, I would like you to be aware, you've probably obviously noticed that I have a resting bitch face, but please don't persecute me for it. I'm not mad. I just can't. This is what I was blessed with. I can't help it. If I find a topic that I'm passionate about, oftentimes I feel like I come off aggressively and I overthink everything. The list goes on and on. However, I have this incessant need inside of me to help someone somewhere, and I want you to feel comfortable here. I want you to know that Unapologetically Reborn is a place where we appreciate honesty. We will speak to you honestly. We hope you will speak to us the same. There are a few things that are a little concerning as we get to know each other, so let's just take a few moments to go over them. Like I said, you have no way to know that I have a resting bitch face. Well, now you do. I probably will have notes with me so I don't get off topic or forget what I'm about to say. I have a tendency to do that. There's going to be times when we laugh at stupid things. There's going to be moments when we talk about messy situations, things that some people may not be ready for or comfortable with. And if this happens to you and we're discussing something that's just too intense or you're uncomfortable hearing about it, we won't be offended if you shut us off. The goal is not to offend or overwhelm anybody. The goal on the podcast is to learn from each other, discover ways to enrich our lives, set and achieve goals, learn about who we are. And I feel like this can apply to anybody, from a person who never got to learn their real identity, but adopted it from an adaptation due to where they came from, and basically it was assigned to them. A parent going through an empty nest syndrome, a bereaved parent, someone moving into their latter years that's never been there, that doesn't know what to expect or what's happening. The list goes on and on. Before each podcast, we will introduce our subject and we'll warn you before we get started and start talking about it in case it's too much. We would also like to invite you to call, email, or write us with ideas for our podcast or questions you may have, or even if you'd like to be a guest on our show. All of our information can be found by going to www.unapologeticallyreborn.com. We will air for 60 minutes every Thursday. This podcast is for anyone trying to get to know themselves or have struggled with their mental health. And many of these podcasts, I'm going to share with you some vulnerabilities, not to sound self-involved, but to share with you some of the things that I've learned, and maybe it will inspire you to do the same. Thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy our show.
Adam.
Hi, welcome to Unapologetically Reborn. I'm your host, Alicia Lynch.
I'm the good-looking co-host, Cody Fullen.
All right, so this is our very first show, and we are going to discuss emotional dysregulation. That is a term that was relatively new to me up until a couple of years ago. And I hate to dominate the conversation, but that's probably what's going to occur in this episode.
Yeah, she's smarter than me.
No, it's not true.
Lies.
All right, so I'm just letting you know now we are going to talk about emotional dysregulation. If you feel comfortable in participating in that chat and want to hear what we have to say, please stay tuned. If this is something that's too much for you, well, we'll see you next time. Let's get started. I never knew up until a few years ago that I lived the majority of my life in survival mode. Emotions were not discussed in my family. They weren't not talked about very much because they were usually looked at like you're weak. Or my favorite part, dramatic. I was always told I was dramatic. Oh, you're going into dramatics. So I just kind of forgot how to deal with them. Growing up around addiction, I learned at a young age, there was the addiction, there was the relapse, there was that individual's pain and their unfinished business. And when you're a child of that, you never know which portion of that you're going to get. The message that I took from this was that my needs were not that important. So if I lit myself on fire to keep everyone else warm, things would be easier. I brought this into my adulthood, and I still lived that way. But I had no clue that I was doing this. I was very sacrificial. I had no idea who I was. And I remembered events in my life, but I just never took the time to feel because my world was full of domestic violence and chaos. It was very chaotic. So basically, you always had to be ready for the next hit. You couldn't really feel too much when an event had occurred. And I had to be the strong one. And eventually, I got really good at it. I got so good at it that I didn't even have to think about doing it anymore. It just kind of came natural. And that's basically how I lived. I tuned everything out. And then pretty much why I decided to make a podcast was all these things that I never dealt with. It took one turn of events. So my life fell apart a little over a decade ago when my son was called to go to heaven. I had 3 other kids and I tried to be their mother, and I went through the motions. They were in their teenage years and they rather, wanted to hang out with their friends rather than their mother. They had some independence. And I had all of this time on my hands. And all of a sudden, all these things happened, and I didn't know how to deal with them. For many years, I felt like I was watching myself on a movie screen. This is going to sound kind of goofy unless you've experienced it. I couldn't hear myself. I couldn't touch myself. It was like I was paralyzed. And I couldn't get back into my body. It was like I was watching myself from a distance. I don't know how else to explain that. I wondered if anybody else could see it and was wondering what I was experiencing. But no one seemed to notice it. And it was like I was screaming inside, but nobody could hear me. All these things came back into my mind from when I was a kid, and I would have to work harder and harder to make them stop. These weren't memories that I had forgotten. They were things that I told myself were ridiculous to feel about because they happened a very, very long time ago. So I didn't see any relevance in rehashing them. But I was in my mid-30s, And things from when I was like 2 came into my head. And this is going to sound a little odd too. Bear with me for a minute. The little girl inside of me would scream. And majority of my life, I was able to shut her up. Years went by in the very same state. She'd pop up, try to talk. I had to go to work. I had to try to make myself appear normal. I had to be normal around my kids as best as I could. I had to be normal at work. And there really wasn't a place to fall apart. So sometimes I would do that in my car. And then I started to get scared. And I started to get scared because I noticed that everything that I used to do, all my coping mechanisms that I basically utilized the majority of my life, they didn't work anymore. And I didn't know what to do. And I couldn't shut this little person off. And it was almost like a tidal wave broke through and waves. The waves weren't taking mercy. There was nowhere to go. It was like shit just got real. I felt defenseless. I had no life jacket, no shelter, no sense of direction. I was just blasted in the face by my past. This little girl wouldn't stop screaming. You're going to listen to me, basically. And one day I felt really defeated and I was tired. And so basically I asked my inner child, okay, what the hell do you want? And one subject to the next came back with a feeling. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. Apparently I'd lost my ability to navigate feelings, or I just never learned how because I was so incredibly lost. So this inner child would pop up, and I started listening to her because I could no longer make her go away. Eventually, I felt awful for the way that I treated her. The more time that I spent with the little person inside of me, the more I fell in love with her. I hated everything about myself when I was a kid, where I came from, and that inner child basically represented all of the ick that I chose not to deal with. But since she was me, I couldn't get away from her, and eventually I had no desire to. I knew she was me, but I began listening to her like she was an innocent little kid, and since I started to care, I felt guilty about how mean I was to her. So I started researching trauma, and I began to teach myself about various topics. I wanted to be a counselor when I was a kid, but I never pursued it because I thought I was too fucked up and that counselors basically had their shit together. At one point, I even thought about becoming an addiction counselor because I knew addiction, but not in the way that addicts do. I knew it by watching it and living in it. My thought process was, why would I have the audacity to tell somebody anything about their addiction if I never suffered from one? But I did suffer from addiction. I lost my childhood because of it. I lost my identity. I suffered from nothing but loss because of it. I wanted to one day be the big person that spoke to the little girl in Family Week, the little girl that was me, the one that sat there, scared to death, in a room surrounded by a bunch of big people who was told it's okay to talk. But she had been trained her entire life to keep her mouth shut. But like many people, I thought counselors, psychologists, social workers, all these kind of people, I was taught don't talk to them. And I used to think that they had it all together. But then I came to realize they're just as messy as the rest of us. I created this podcast for people like me that genuinely are not looking for pity, validation, or anything like that, but they struggle to feel their emotions because they were taught at a young age they were dramatic or inconvenient. The people that are working hard to uncover who they were born to be, not what role they were assigned. This is what this podcast represents. This is not the place for anyone that feels they need to be perfect or try to convince everyone else they are. This is for the people that are on a mission to learn about who they are, uncover their truth, and learn to walk in their God-given right to their very own personality. But no matter how hard they try, they feel torn, lost, or cannot get off this continuous circle of confusion because they find themselves having two different thoughts on the same subject, questioning their judgment or feeling like they need permission to have an opinion. That permission you seek, I openly give it to you. That justification you feel you need to make before you make a statement, it's not a bad habit. It's not a habit that you picked up. I want you to hear me. This is conditioning. So, because there really was no time to feel or absorb feelings, because surviving these events had to take precedence. What's the next move? How do I fix this? These were the questions that needed to be answered. These situations are messy, and if caring about what other people think, they can easily become quite shameful because the world will judge, and they seem to do it without all of the facts. One thing I'd like to clarify before we begin is how childhood trauma shapes your life. There are people out there who are going to judge what I'm going to talk about. Neither you nor I can change this. Some people believe that childhood trauma happened a long time ago and should have no bearings in their life today. I used to think of that myself. I used to agree with that. Please know, this is not about blaming anyone's parents, because chances are that your parents were dysregulated as well. If I blamed myself, I would not have to feel or acknowledge my past, sever any relationships, or go through grieving what had occurred. But beyond that, what I learned was if I sacrificed myself, I wasn't real with myself, I could keep the relationships that I was in, and I wouldn't have to come to the acceptance that I outgrew those relationships. So here's the deal. Childhood trauma sets you up for core shameful beliefs about yourself that are not true. Whether you like it or not, you're not able to become who you were born to be or free to be who you are because you adapt to situations just to survive. These are called adaptations. Adaptations are roles that you play. After years and years of doing something, you don't even realize you're playing this role anymore because you identify these as personality traits, and these begin to shape your identity. What is an adaptation? We're going to talk about this in our episode 2, but briefly, there's many things like the overachiever in the family, the comedian, the scapegoat. We carry these into our adult life, and we'll explore these more in depth on our next podcast. But as I stated earlier, you cannot change yourself or find your identity until you become regulated. So it's imperative to discover whether or not if you're dysregulated. And if you are, you have to learn how to become regulated. In the next few podcasts, we will discuss what being dysregulated is and how to change it. Please note that this is not a one-time discussion or practice. This is something that you will find yourself doing repetitively. But being cognizant about this is key. The biggest thing about myself I couldn't stand. We're going to talk about things that I didn't like about myself. Remember that these subjects are messy, and I wouldn't be doing you any justice if I tried to paint these any color or pretend that these are perfect. Just because we're making a podcast, we're perfect. Before you had language, your body remembered situations and it took notes. When you try to change something mentally and you can't seem to get anywhere, you need to think of the physiology involved first. These are things that I wish I would have been taught, but I had no clue. Dysregulation becomes a problem later in life. And here's the painful part. What saved you early on becomes exhausting later. In adulthood, dysregulation will look like a constant urgency, an inability to enjoy accomplishments, memory and focus problems, living in your head, guilt when resting, emotional numbness or overwhelm, exhaustion that doesn't resolve, feeling behind even when you're not, difficulty knowing who you are without a task. Those are the things we're going to discuss about me. This does not mean that you're broken. It means that your nervous system is still running in an old survival program. Dysregulation can form in childhood. And here's what's important to understand. Babies and children cannot regulate themselves. They borrow regulation from caregivers. This is called co-regulation. In healthy early development, a baby cries, a caregiver responds. The baby's nervous system calms with help. Over time, the child internalizes this. The brain learns distress equals comfort equals resolution. That cycle teaches safety, emotional rhythm, completion, and trust in rest. What happens when co-regulation is missing or inconsistent? Dysregulation forms when caregivers are unpredictable, overwhelmed, critical, absent, or frightening. Emotions are dismissed, punished, or ignored. The environment is chaotic, unsafe, or emotionally volatile. The child must stay alert to survive. In these conditions, the child's nervous system learns, I cannot rely on others to help me. Settle. I must stay ready. Calm is not guaranteed. So the system adapts by staying activated. This is not a failure. This is intelligence. By insight alone doesn't fix dysregulation. Dysregulation is not a thinking problem. It's a body-based state. You can understand everything intellectually and still feel trapped because dysregulation happens below language. It's formed before reasoning. It's stored in autonomic responses, not beliefs. That's why logic doesn't calm urgency. Achievement doesn't bring peace. Reassurance doesn't stick. The body hasn't learned safety yet. So your nervous system continuously shifts. It normally shifts between two primary states when it's regulated. It does this naturally. But when it gets stuck in dysregulation, it struggles with coordinating the two in balance. The nervous system's primary concern is keeping you alive. So for an example, when you're experiencing trauma in your life and you forget things, it's normal. This is something that I've highly struggled with, and it would really piss me off because I used to be very articulate and spoke and wrote very well. Today, I really have to work at it. Physiologically, your brain cannot store information and could care less about remembering because all it wants to do is scan for danger. It's looking for things that are unsafe so that it can keep you alive and you can protect yourself. This is why people that have lived through a lot of trauma in their life often get judged as being negative. Now this is a great piece for a lot of us. This person may even get sick of themselves, okay? You get annoyed with yourself because you don't want to be that way. You want to change, but it keeps happening no matter what you do, no matter what goals you set. You can't seem to become more positive. Well, here's a scientific fact. When trauma occurs continuously, okay, it's called complex trauma, the brain gets stuck on that default of scanning. So it's looking for dangerous things. Therefore, learning becomes a challenge because it's hard to retain that information. But above this fact, the brain itself has been programmed to look for things that may potentially hurt you. Therefore, the person this is happening inside of is always looking for what could potentially go wrong. This may appear negative to other people. So you see John, he always appears to be a negative individual, but you don't know what's happening inside of him. So here's the good news. It's not your fault. Your brain does this automatically. Therefore, no matter how many times you try to convince yourself that you're going to change your behavior and you fail at it, it's because you need to deal with the physiology of what's happening inside of you. The bad part is most of us do not have the slightest clue about what we're talking about. We didn't even know this was a concept. We go round and round in circles and we see no change, no matter what we try, no matter what we do. The good part is once we learn what's happening within our system, we can learn and we can work on becoming regulated, which in return can reprogram our brains and we can begin to process our thoughts and become more positive. Does that sound easy? It does. Well, it's going to require a lot of work and commitment, but it can be done. It's not a one-time fix, and it will require frequent maintenance. So let me explain. Dysregulation means that the nervous system has trouble moving smoothly between two states. So here's a short anatomy lesson. Your nervous system is like the body's command center. It coordinates everything from your thoughts and your feelings to your breathing and your heartbeat. It manages countless functions, and those functions keep you healthy and they keep you alive. So there are two branches, let's say. There's the sympathetic nervous system, which is like your fight or flight response. And this pretty much perceives danger, stress. You get an increased heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle tension. It prepares your body for action. The second is called the parasympathetic nervous system. This is known as your rest and your digest response. This basically helps you to recover, relax. It slows down your heart rate, your immune functions, supports your digestion. A normal regulated system can get activated when needed. It can focus that effort and that urgency. And then once the event is done, it can come back and it can rest and it can be satisfied and it can move on. A dysregulated system, it gets stuck. It gets confused. It's stuck on high urgency, anxiety, pressure, racing mind, or it can get stuck on low, which involves like a numbness, fog, emptiness, exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that no matter how much you sleep, you're still tired. I'm describing what's called chronic high activation dysregulation. That's not emotional instability. Whether it feels like it or not, it's not. You're not emotionally unstable. I just want you to, you're not emotionally unstable. Just process this with me. This is your nervous system. And your nervous system's confused and it doesn't know what to do. So in a regulated nervous system, effort has an end, accomplishments land, rest feels safe, emotions move through and they resolve. The present moment feels accessible. In a dysregulated system, there's always more to do. Nothing ever feels complete. Rest feels wrong or dangerous. Emotions linger or leak sideways. The mind lives in the future or the past. And this often feels unsettling. And when you begin to work on it, I just want to give you a couple warnings. When dysregulation begins to loosen its grip, you may feel grief, anger, emptiness, confusion about identity, who you are without urgency. You're not collapsing, you're reorganizing. And you have to keep reminding yourself that you're not losing yourself. You're meeting the part of you that never got to rest. I know this is interesting, right?
Oh, so much.
So signs of dysregulation that you may have. Stay with me just to see if you're dysregulated. Chronic stress, ongoing exposure to stress. I got this from PubMed. Ongoing exposure to stress, whether emotional, social, or environmental. So basically you're in fight or flight all the time. Over time, this reduces your system's ability to shift back. We discussed that. Traumatic experiences and emotional overwhelm. Past or ongoing trauma, including childhood and adversity, emotional neglect, relational conflict, or significant life upheavals can sensitize your nervous system. So it's triggered by little stressors. Lack of adequate rest and recovery. So you sleep, you try to sleep, you can't sleep, you do sleep, you still feel tired. Social isolation and lack of safe relationships. Now here's another one that gets a bit confusing because you can have two feelings about the same issue. Human nervous systems are wired for connection. So you might feel lonely and isolated, or you might have unstable relationships that can impair your nervous system's ability to regulate. One of my favorites is, sorry, my hand fell asleep. You may want to be connected to people. You may long for that connection. You may feel lonely, but in the process, you find yourself exhausted even thinking about having friendships. Even though they appeal to you, you just don't have the energy, so you don't entertain that. Lifestyle factors, nutrition, exercise, environmental exposure. An imbalanced diet, nutrition deficiencies, excessive caffeine. I'm guilty of this. Constant noises or screen time can impair your nervous system's resilience and adaptability. Physical health concerns. This will cut into your physical health. You could suffer from chronic illnesses, hormonal imbalances, autoimmune conditions, inflammation, arthritis. Arthritis is a big one. I don't remember the facts off the top of my head, but they're pretty high for somebody that suffered from childhood complex trauma into inflammation disorders. You'd be astonished if you look that up. These factors can overlap and compound in one another. By understanding the common root of the nervous system dysregulation, you can start addressing them. So, you can go to the doctor. I have these constant headaches. I have this, I have that, and then think you have some type of disease, but you don't. It could be caused by your trauma or dysregulation. Obviously, this is different from person to person. Persistent anxiety and racing thoughts. You worry about things. That is a hallmark indicator of a dysregulated nervous system. Feeling emotionally overwhelmed, irritable, or easily triggered.
Damn, I lose one.
Huh?
That means then I lose.
That's something that you suffer from?
Unfortunately.
Okay. That's not good. Chronic fatigue, burnout, and exhaustion. I'm guilty of this. This is often associated with autonomic dysfunction from a heightened sympathetic activity. Trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, having insomnia.
God, I lose again.
Brain fog. Can you continue? I'm going to let the dog out. Of course, I'm trying to record and the dog wants to go outside.
I will do that to the co-host, or the host of the most is better than me.
Thanks. Not so much, but okay.
And I got 2 out of the 8 sentences.
Brain fog, difficulties concentrating, memory issues, mental fatigue. We're going to get into the scientific stuff of all of this. Muscle tension, chronic pain, headaches, digestive issues, IBS, bloating, gut discomfort, sensitivity to noise, light, touch, frequent colds, flare-ups. We discussed autoimmune systems. You can get heart palpitations. Jaws can tense. You can grind your teeth. You can have recurring headaches, migraines. Again, this is very exhausting on your body. The most important thing I would like you to take is dysregulation is not a weakness. It's not emotional immaturity. It's not a failure to cope. It's not a personality flaw. It's a nervous system that adapted to an environment where safety was unreliable, and adapted systems can learn new rhythms. So before we close, I would just like to say, remember that you're not crazy. You're not emotionally unstable. You're more likely in survival mode, which is where we will begin in our next couple of podcasts. I thank you for being here. And until next week, remember, this is not about fixing yourself. It's about understanding yourself. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.